The year was 2024, and something strange was happening in American sports. People who had never watched a women's college basketball game in their lives were suddenly rearranging their Sunday afternoons. They were crowding into bars that usually only showed men's games, and they were yelling at their television sets like it was the NBA Finals. The reason for this madness was a 6-foot-tall guard from West Des Moines, Iowa, with a flamethrower for a shooting hand and a confidence that could fill a stadium. Her name was Caitlin Clark, and she was about to do something that nobody thought possible. She was going to make women's basketball the hottest ticket in the country. To understand how this happened, you have to go back to where it all started. Caitlin Clark was not born into a basketball dynasty. Her parents were both athletes, but they were the kind of athletes who played for the love of the game, not for the spotlight. Her father Brent played basketball and baseball at Simpson College, a small Division III school in Iowa. Her mother Ann was a gymnast at the University of Iowa. So Caitlin grew up in a house where sports were always on, where competition was a daily ritual. But from the very beginning, there was something different about the way she saw the game. Most kids learn to pass before they learn to shoot. Caitlin learned to shoot from about 30 feet. Her high school coach at Dowling Catholic, Kristen Mayer, remembers watching her take warm-ups from the parking lot. She was not just practicing deep threes. She was practicing them with a kind of swagger that made you think she had been doing it her whole life. By the time she was a senior in high school, Caitlin was already a legend in Iowa. She had won back-to-back state championships. She was the #1 recruit in the country, and every major program in the nation was calling. But she chose to stay home. She chose the University of Iowa, a school that had not been to a Final Four in 30 years. People thought she was crazy. Why would the best shooter in the country go to a program that was good but not great? The answer was simple. Caitlin Clark did not want to join a dynasty. She wanted to start one. Her freshman season in 2020 was played in the middle of the pandemic, with empty arenas and muffled crowds. But even in silence, her talent screamed. She averaged 26 points per game, she broke the NCAA freshman scoring record, and she led Iowa to the Sweet 16. Still, most of the country did not know her name yet. That changed in her sophomore year when the crowds came back and Caitlin Clark put on a show that made people stop and stare. It was not just the points, though there were plenty of them. It was the way she played. She would pull up from the logo 30 feet from the basket and let the ball fly with a motion so quick and so natural that defenders could only watch. And then she would turn around and jog back down the court, not celebrating, just waiting for the next trip. That was the thing about Caitlin. She did not play like she wanted to be famous. She played like she had already seen herself do this 1,000 times. By the end of her junior season in 2023, Caitlin Clark was a household name. She had led Iowa to the national championship game, where they lost to LSU in a matchup that drew nearly 10 million viewers, the largest audience ever for a women's college basketball game. But that game was more than just a contest. It was a cultural event. It sparked debates about race, about money, about who gets to be the face of a sport. Caitlin Clark was a white woman from the Midwest, playing a game that had been built and dominated by black women. That reality created a tension that she could not control, and it is a tension that still follows her today. But what she could control was her game. And in her senior season, she took that game to a level nobody had ever seen. The 2023-2024 season was the season of Caitlin Clark. Every game was a record. She became the all-time leading scorer in NCAA women's basketball history, passing the legendary Kelsey Plum. Then she passed Lynette Woodard, who had held the record from the pre-NCAA era. Then she passed Pete Maravich to become the all-time leading scorer in all of NCAA Division I basketball, men or women. And she did it with the whole country watching. Television ratings for Iowa games exploded. The Big Ten tournament final between Iowa and Nebraska drew 3.6 million viewers, a number that rivaled men's games. The regular season game against Ohio State, where Caitlin scored 45 points and hit a game-winning three from the logo, drew nearly 4 million viewers. That is more people than watched the NBA All-Star Game that same year. But here is the thing about Caitlin Clark that people often miss. She was not just a scorer. She was also the best passer in the country. She could throw a no-look pass from half-court that would hit her teammate in stride, a pass so precise that it looked like she had drawn it up on a chalkboard in her head. She averaged almost 9 assists per game for her career, and she made her teammates better. The Iowa offense was built around her vision. Every player on the court knew that if they ran hard, Caitlin would find them. That unselfishness was part of what made her so compelling. She did not just win games. She made the game beautiful. And the viewers responded. By the time the NCAA tournament started in March of 2024, women's basketball was the hottest ticket in sports. The Iowa games were being shown on network television. ESPN was covering the team like they were the Los Angeles Lakers. The players were getting name, image, and likeness deals worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. But Caitlin was the engine. She was the reason why all of this was happening. Every time she stepped on the court, she carried the weight of a sport that was desperate to be taken seriously. And she did not shrink from it. She embraced it. The tournament itself was a coronation. Iowa rolled through the first 2 rounds, beating Holy Cross and West Virginia in games that were never close. Then came the Sweet 16 against Colorado, a game that was supposed to be a test. Colorado had a big, physical front line, and they had a talented guard in Jalen Sherrod who was known for her defense. But Caitlin Clark was not bothered. She scored 29 points, grabbed 15 rebounds, and dished out 13 assists. She had a triple-double in a game that mattered in front of a national audience, and she made it look easy. Then came the Elite Eight. The opponent was LSU, the defending national champions, the same team that had beaten Iowa in the title game a year earlier. The rematch was the most anticipated game of the entire tournament. Everyone wanted to see if Caitlin could get revenge. And she did. She scored 41 points, hitting 9 three-pointers, and she did it while playing all 40 minutes. The final score was 94-87. Iowa was going back to the Final Four, and the television ratings for that game were staggering. Over 12 million people watched. That is more than any women's college basketball game in history. It was more than most men's Final Four games. It was a number that made everyone in sports sit up and pay attention. The Final Four in Cleveland was a spectacle. Iowa faced UConn in the semifinals, a matchup between 2 of the most storied programs in women's basketball history. But this time, the story was not about the schools. It was about the player. Caitlin Clark went for 21 points, 9 rebounds, and 7 assists in a game that was close until the final minute. Iowa won by 11, and they were heading to the national championship game against South Carolina, the undefeated team that had been ranked number 1 all season. South Carolina was a machine. They had not lost a game all year. They had a front line of towers, players like Camila Cardoso and Chloe Kitts who made it almost impossible to score inside. And they had a defense that suffocated opposing guards. Everyone thought this would be Caitlin's toughest test, and in some ways it was. South Carolina doubled her every time she crossed half court. They face-guarded her, they trapped her, they did everything they could to take the ball out of her hands, and for the first half it worked. Caitlin missed shots. She turned the ball over. Iowa was down by 9 at the break, but then came the second half, and with it came the kind of performance that changes a player's legacy forever. Caitlin Clark did not panic. She just started making plays. She hit a 3 from way downtown. She drove and kicked to an open teammate. She pulled up for a mid-range jumper. Slowly, the lead started to shrink. By the fourth quarter, Iowa was within striking distance. And then, with under a minute to play, Caitlin hit a step-back 3 that pulled Iowa to within 2 points. The crowd lost its mind. The game was not over, but for a moment, it felt like she had done the impossible. South Carolina held on to win by 5 points. The final score was 87-82. Caitlin Clark finished with 30 points, but it was not enough. The loss was heartbreaking. Anyone could see it in her eyes as she walked off the court. She had come so close twice now to winning the one thing that eluded her, but here is the strange part. the loss did not diminish her. If anything, it made her story bigger, because basketball fans do not just love winners, they love fighters, and Caitlin Clark had fought until the final second. The television ratings for that national championship game were the highest in women's college basketball history. Over 18 million people watched. That is more than the men's national championship game that same year. That is more than most NBA playoff games. A woman, playing a game that had been considered a niche sport for decades, had become the biggest draw in all of American sports. And that is where we are now. Caitlin Clark is about to enter the WNBA draft, where she will almost certainly be the #1 pick by the Indiana Fever. And the conversation around her has shifted. People are no longer asking if women's basketball can be popular. They are asking how far she can take it. Will she lead the Fever to a championship? Will she bring millions of new fans to the league? Will she change the way women's sports are valued and monetized? The answers are still being written, but one thing is already clear. Caitlin Clark did not just turn women's hoops into must-see TV. She made it impossible to look away. She made it matter. In the next segment, we are going to go deeper into what it felt like to be inside those arenas, to witness the phenomenon from the stands, and to understand the cultural forces that collided around this one extraordinary player. We will talk to fans, to journalists, to the people who knew her when she was just a kid with a crazy dream. And we will explore the bigger questions that her rise forces us to ask about sports, about fame, and about who gets to be a hero in America. Stick around. And stick around we did. The arenas became cathedrals of noise, places where the ordinary rules of sports fandom seemed to bend. Walking into Carver Hawkeye Arena on game day felt like entering a different dimension. The queue for tickets stretched around the block, sometimes for hours, and those who got in carried a sense of collective purpose. It was not just about watching a basketball game. It was about witnessing history being made in real time, about being part of a moment that would be talked about for decades. The energy inside the arena was electric, a hum that started low in the concourse and built into a roar the moment Caitlin Clark stepped onto the floor for warm-ups. Fans wore her jersey in every color imaginable: black, gold, white, even a special edition throwback that sold out within hours. They held signs that read "Clark for President" and "She's the GOAT" and "Logo Season." And when she hit her first three-pointer, the place erupted in a way that felt less like a sports event and more like a revival. But it was not just the home crowds that turned out. Everywhere Iowa played, the stands were packed. In Columbus, Ohio, the arena was sold out for the first time in years for a women's game. In Lincoln, Nebraska, they added extra sections of temporary seating. In Minneapolis, the Big Ten tournament drew crowds that rivaled the men's tournament, with fans lined up at dawn even for early round games that started at 11 a.m. The demand was so intense that ticket prices on the secondary market spiked to levels normally reserved for NBA playoff games. A single seat in the lower bowl for the Iowa-LSU Elite Eight game sold for over $2,000. Entire families pooled their savings to get in, because they understood that this was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And the players noticed. After games, Caitlin often stayed for an extra hour signing autographs and taking selfies, sometimes until security had to physically escort her off the court. She seemed to understand that the fans were not just cheering for her. They were cheering for the idea that women's sports could be this big, this loud, this alive. The journalists covering the story felt that energy too. I spoke to reporters who had covered women's basketball for 20 years, who had seen the sport grow from a niche afterthought to a legitimate primetime property. They told me that Caitlin Clark was not just a player, she was a reset button. Suddenly, editors who had never cared about women's hoops were demanding daily updates. ESPN assigned a dedicated crew to follow Iowa for the entire tournament. Network TV shows like Good Morning America and The Today Show booked Caitlin for interviews. The New York Times ran a front-page story about her impact on the game. And when she announced she would enter the WNBA draft, The news was treated like a major sports event, with live press conferences and breaking news alerts. The sheer volume of coverage was unprecedented for any college athlete, men's or women's, and it reflected a cultural shift that had been building for years. Part of that shift was economic. By the time the 2024 NCAA tournament ended, Caitlin Clark had become one of the most marketable athletes in the world. Her name, image, and likeness deals were worth an estimated $3 million, a staggering sum for a college player. She had partnerships with major brands like Nike, State Farm, and Gatorade, and her face was plastered on billboards and commercials across the country. But the money was only a symptom of something deeper. Caitlin Clark had become a symbol of possibility. She showed that a woman could be the biggest star in a sport, that she could draw ratings that eclipsed men's competition, that she could make people who never watched women's basketball suddenly care. And that kind of cultural power is hard to quantify, but it is very real. The WNBA was watching closely. The league had been in a long, slow climb toward mainstream relevance, but it had never had a player who could single-handedly drag millions of new viewers into the tent. The closest comparison was maybe Lisa Leslie or Sue Bird, but even they had not generated the kind of ratings and buzz that Caitlin Clark produced in a single season. The WNBA draft lottery had already set records when the Indiana Fever won the #1 pick, and the anticipation for draft night was electric. The Fever had been a struggling franchise for years, finishing near the bottom of the standings and playing in front of sparse crowds. But with Caitlin, everything changed. Season ticket sales for the Fever jumped by over 500% in the weeks after the draft announcement. The team's social media followers exploded. Even the coaching staff got a boost, with reporters from national outlets calling for interviews about the team's future. The draft itself was a spectacle. Held at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, the event was moved to a bigger venue to accommodate the demand. Television cameras captured every moment, from the red carpet arrivals to the nervous smiles of the top prospects. When WNBA Commissioner Kathy Engelbert called Caitlin Clark's name as the #1 pick, the crowd erupted. Caitlin walked to the stage wearing a crisp white suit, her Iowa smile still intact, and hugged her family before stepping to the microphone. She spoke about her journey, about the people who believed in her, about the responsibility she felt to grow the game. It was a polished, confident speech that made you forget she was only 22 years old. And then she held up the Fever jersey, and for a moment, it was like the future of women's sports had just been delivered in a single image. But the draft was just the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead. The WNBA is a different beast than college basketball. The players are bigger, faster, and more experienced. The defenses are smarter and more physical. There are no weak opponents, no nights when you can coast on talent alone. Every game is a battle, and the schedule is grueling, with back-to-backs and cross-country travel that would wear down even the most durable athletes. Caitlin Clark would have to adjust to a game where double teams start at half court, where defenders are allowed more contact, where the three-point line is farther back. And she would have to do it while carrying the weight of an entire sport on her shoulders. The early returns were mixed. In her first preseason game, she looked sharp, scoring 18 points and dishing out 6 assists in limited minutes. The crowd in Indianapolis was electric, a sea of yellow and blue that had not been seen in years. Social media lit up with highlights of her no-look passes and step-back threes, but the regular season brought a dose of reality. In her debut against the Connecticut Sun, she shot just 4 of 12 from the field and committed 5 turnovers. The Fever lost by 12. The headlines the next morning were brutal. Clark struggles in WNBA debut, the hype versus the reality, not so easy anymore. Some critics wondered if she was ready for the league. Others pointed out that her supporting cast was thin, that the Fever had not surrounded her with enough talent. But Caitlin did not panic. She went back to the gym, worked on her footwork, watched film. And in her second game, she bounced back with 24 points and 9 assists in a win over the New York Liberty. The narrative shifted, at least for a week. The season was a roller coaster. There were nights when Caitlin looked like the best player on the court, her vision and shooting creating offense out of nothing. There were nights when she looked like a rookie, overwhelmed by the speed and physicality of the pro game. But through it all, the fans kept coming. The Fever's home games became the hottest ticket in town, with celebrities and former players showing up to watch. The television ratings for WNBA games featuring the Fever more than doubled compared to the previous season. The league's overall viewership jumped by over 40%, driven almost entirely by the Caitlin Clark effect. Merchandise sales for the Fever surged. The WNBA's social media accounts saw a massive spike in engagement. Even the league office acknowledged that Caitlin had brought a wave of attention that was unlike anything they had seen before. But the impact was not limited to the WNBA. It rippled through the entire ecosystem of women's sports. Other women's basketball players began to see more endorsement opportunities. The NCAA women's tournament viewership remained high, even without Caitlin, because new fans had been hooked. Youth participation in girls' basketball saw a noticeable uptick, with parents reporting that their daughters were inspired by watching Caitlin on TV. She had become a role model, not just for her skills but for her attitude, her joy, her intensity, her willingness to embrace the spotlight without apologizing for it. And yet, there was also a shadow side to the attention. Caitlin Clark's rise had been accompanied by a wave of criticism and controversy, much of it rooted in the uncomfortable dynamics of race and gender in sports. Some detractors argued that she was overhyped, that her white privilege had given her a platform that black players like A'ja Wilson or Breanna Stewart had never received. Others pointed out that the media's focus on her had often overshadowed the incredible talent of other players, especially players of color. The conversation was tense and complicated, and Caitlin herself rarely engaged with it directly. She let her game speak, but the noise was always there, a reminder that sports do not exist in a vacuum. They are a mirror of the society in which they are played, with all its inequities and tensions. In the locker room, Caitlin navigated the dynamics carefully. She was not the loudest voice, but she was respected. Her teammates saw how hard she worked, how she stayed late after practice to run extra drills, how she always gave credit to others. The Fever's veterans like Kelsey Mitchell and Nalissa Smith helped guide her through the rough patches. The chemistry took time, but by the midpoint of the season, the team was starting to gel. They won a stretch of 5 straight games, including an upset victory over the Las Vegas Aces, the defending champions. Caitlin had 28 points and 10 assists in that game, and her post-game interview went viral for the way she deflected praise onto her teammates. "They made it easy for me," she said, and you could see the genuine gratitude in her eyes. The All-Star break brought another milestone. Caitlin was selected to the WNBA All-Star team as a reserve, making her the first rookie to earn that honor in over a decade. The All-Star game itself was held in Phoenix, and the arena was packed with fans wearing Clark jerseys. She played 16 minutes, scored 12 points, and had 5 assists, but the highlight came in the third quarter when she threw a behind-the-back pass to A'ja Wilson for an easy layup. The crowd roared. The players on the bench stood up. It was a moment of pure basketball joy, a reminder that at its core, the sport is about connection and creativity. As the season wound down, the Fever found themselves in a playoff race. They had not made the postseason in years, but with Caitlin leading the way, they had a real shot. The final weeks were a grind, with every game carrying enormous weight. The media circus intensified. Every missed shot was analyzed, every turnover dissected. The pressure was immense, but Caitlin seemed to thrive under it. In the second-to-last game of the regular season, with the playoffs on the line, she scored 35 points, grabbed 8 rebounds, and dished out 7 assists in a win over the Seattle Storm. The Fever clinched the 8th seed. They were going to the playoffs. The first-round series was against the top-seeded Las Vegas Aces, the powerhouse team led by A'ja Wilson and Chelsea Gray. The odds were stacked against Indiana. Nobody gave them a chance. But in Game 1, Caitlin Clark put on a show. She scored 32 points, including 5 three-pointers, and the Fever shocked the Aces by 4 points. The basketball world went into a frenzy. The ratings for that game were the highest for any WNBA playoff game in history. The next morning, every sports show talked about nothing else. The Fever lost Game 2, but they took Game 3 to overtime before falling by 3. The series ended, but the narrative had shifted. Caitlin Clark had proven she belonged. She had proven that the hype was real, and she had set the stage for what could come next. The offseason will be crucial. The Fever have cap space and draft picks to build around Caitlin. The front office is already working on bringing in complementary pieces. The league itself is changing, expanding to new cities, negotiating a new television deal that could double the value of the WNBA. And Caitlin Clark is at the center of it all, the young star who carried the torch from college to the pros and ignited a movement. She has not won a championship yet, not in the NCAA and not in the WNBA. But the quest is what makes the story compelling. Every year she gets a little better, a little stronger, a little more resilient. And every year the audience grows. So where does it end? It does not yet. Caitlin Clark is still writing her story, one game at a time, one signature shot at a time. The arenas will keep filling up. The ratings will keep climbing. The little girls in the stands will keep dreaming. And the game of basketball will keep changing, because one player decided that she was not going to let the world tell her what was possible. She was going to show them. And so the story continued, the offseason becoming a proving ground in its own right. Caitlin did not disappear after the playoff series against the Aces. She stayed in Indianapolis, working with a private trainer to refine her mid-range game and improve her lateral quickness on defense. The footage of her workouts leaked onto social media, showing her drilling step-back jumpers and chasing imaginary defenders through cones. The fans ate it up, but the critics kept watching, waiting for any sign of weakness. In December, the Fever announced a trade, acquiring a veteran center who could stretch the floor and protect the rim. The front office also drafted a sharpshooting wing in the first round. The pieces were falling into place, but the weight of expectation only grew heavier. The new season tipped off with a sold-out crowd at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, a scene that would have been unimaginable 2 years earlier. Caitlin walked onto the court to a standing ovation, the roar so loud that she later admitted she had to blink back tears. She had spent the summer working on her body, adding muscle to her frame without losing any of her quickness. The result was a player who looked faster, stronger, and more decisive. In the season opener against the Phoenix Mercury, she recorded a triple-double, 24 points, 11 rebounds, and 13 assists. It was the first triple-double by a Fever player in 5 years. The replay of her no-look pass to the new center, a perfect lob from the top of the key, played on loop across every sports network. But the season was not a smooth ride. The Fever faced early injuries, and Caitlin struggled with consistency from beyond the arc. She shot just 28% from 3 over the first 10 games, and the murmurs of a sophomore slump began to surface. The talk shows debated whether she had been figured out, whether the league's defenses had adjusted to her rhythm and her reads. And yet, even on those off nights, her court vision remained extraordinary. She was drawing double teams, pulling defenders away from her teammates, creating opportunities that did not show up on the stat sheet. The coaching staff kept reminding her that the numbers would come, that the process was sound. Then came the road trip to Las Vegas. The Aces had reloaded, adding another all-star to their roster, and the game was billed as a rematch of the playoff series. The arena was hostile, the crowd loud, and A'ja Wilson was playing at an MVP level. Caitlin struggled in the first half, scoring only 6 points on 2 of 9 shooting. At halftime, the Fever trailed by 15. In the locker room, she sat quietly, staring at the floor. The veterans pulled her aside, telling her that she had been here before, that she knew how to fight. In the third quarter, she erupted. She scored 17 points in the frame, hitting 4 three-pointers and dished out 5 assists. The Fever cut the deficit to 3. In the final minute, with the shot clock winding down, Caitlin pulled up from 30 feet and swished a dagger that silenced the crowd. The Fever won by 4. The post-game interview went viral again, but this time the narrative was different. It was not about the hype. It was about resilience. The season continued to bring surprises. In late July, the WNBA announced a new television contract worth more than $200 million over 5 years, a staggering increase from the previous deal. League officials credited Caitlin Clark's impact directly, noting that her presence had driven a 55% increase in viewership across all broadcasts. The revenue boost allowed the league to raise player salaries, improve travel accommodations, and expand the marketing budget. Players who had spent years fighting for visibility suddenly found themselves in national commercials and magazine covers. Caitlin's endorsement portfolio grew as well, with deals from major athletic brands and a luxury watch company. She used part of her earnings to fund a basketball academy in Iowa, ensuring that the next generation of girls from her home state would have access to coaching and facilities. Yet the shadow of the earlier criticism never fully lifted. Every time a black player had a standout performance, the inevitable comparison surfaced. When Aja Wilson scored 40 points in a playoff game, the headlines read, "Aja Wilson outshines Clark in MVP duel." When Breena Stewart won her 3rd championship, some commentators framed it as a rebuttal to the Clark hype. Caitlin handled the noise with a quiet dignity. She rarely spoke about race in interviews, but her actions spoke volumes. She frequently used her platform to amplify the voices of her teammates and opponents, sharing their highlights on social media, praising their achievements in press conferences. She donated to organizations that supported youth basketball in underserved communities. She understood, even if she did not say it, that her presence had opened doors for others, and she was determined to keep them open. The Fever pushed deep into the playoffs that second season, reaching the semifinals before falling in 5 games to the New York Liberty. The series was a masterpiece of basketball drama, with Caitlin and Liberty guard Sabrina Ionescu trading daggers in every game. In Game 4, with the Fever facing elimination, Caitlin played all 40 minutes, scoring 41 points, including a step-back 3 with 10 seconds left to force overtime. The Liberty won in the extra period, but the performance was hailed as one of the greatest in WNBA postseason history. After the game, Ionescu pulled Caitlin aside and hugged her. "You're the future," she whispered, and Caitlin, exhausted and emotional, nodded. She knew the future was not just about her. It was about everyone who would come after. The 3rd season brought the ultimate test. The Fever had rebuilt around Caitlin with a core of young stars, including a second-year point guard who had learned the system and a defensive anchor who had been acquired in a trade. The chemistry was there. The confidence was there. The regular season was a blur of wins, with Caitlin averaging a near triple-double while shooting 40% from 3. She won the MVP award unanimously, the first time a player had done so in WNBA history. The trophy ceremony was held at the arena, and her speech was short. She thanked her teammates, the coaching staff, and the fans. Then she said, "We're not done yet." The playoffs were a coronation. The Fever swept the first 2 rounds, facing a 7th-seeded upset team that had no answer for Caitlin's pick-and-roll mastery. In the finals, they met the Las Vegas Aces once again, the team that had ended their run 2 years earlier. The series went the distance, 7 games of unrelenting intensity. In Game 7, in front of a packed arena that had been invaded by Fever fans, Caitlin Clark scored 39 points, grabbed 10 rebounds, and handed out 12 assists. With 30 seconds left, she drove baseline, took a hard foul, and still managed to toss a pass to the wing for a game-clinching 3. The final score was 95-89. The Fever had won the championship. Caitlin was named Finals MVP, and the image of her holding the trophy, eyes closed, mouth open in a scream of joy, became the defining photograph of the season. But this is not the end of the story. A championship is a moment, not a destination. Caitlin Clark returned for a 4th season, older, wiser, and still hungry. The league continued to grow, with new expansion teams in Portland and Toronto, and a television audience that rivaled the men's game. The conversations about race and gender did not disappear, but they became more nuanced, more honest. And Caitlin, now a veteran, took on the role of mentor, helping the next wave of rookies adjust to the spotlight. She still practiced late into the night. She still listened to her coaches. She still found joy in the little things, a perfect pass, a swish three, a fan sign that said, "You made me believe." The story of Caitlin Clark is not about a single game or a single season. It is about the way a person can change the world by refusing to accept its limits. She walked onto a court with a ball in her hands and a vision in her head, and she made us all watch. And we are still watching because the best part of the story is yet to be written. The arenas will keep filling. The ratings will keep climbing. The little girls in the stands will keep dreaming. And the game of basketball will keep evolving because one player decided that she was not going to let the world tell her what was possible. She was going to show them, and she did, and she still does, and she still does. The fourth season arrived with a different kind of pressure. The championship banner hung from the rafters, a constant reminder that the Fever were no longer underdogs. They were the hunted. Every team circled the calendar for their matchup with Indiana, and every arena sold out weeks in advance. Caitlin felt the weight of expectation, but she also felt something new, a sense of calm. She had proven she could win. She had proven she could handle the noise. Now she could simply play. The season opener was a rematch of the finals, a nationally televised game against the Las Vegas Aces. The Aces had retooled, adding a sharpshooting guard and a young center who had developed into a shot-blocking force. The Fever, meanwhile, had lost a key veteran to free agency, forcing the coaching staff to integrate a rookie point guard named Maya Torres, a lightning-quick player out of Stanford who had been drafted 6th overall. Caitlin took Maya under her wing from the first day of training camp. She stayed late to run drills with her, teaching her how to read defenses, how to use ball screens, how to deliver passes with the right pace. Maya was a sponge, absorbing every lesson, and by the time the season started, she was ready. In the opener, the Fever fell behind early. The Aces came out with fire, hitting three-pointers and forcing turnovers. Caitlin struggled to find her rhythm, scoring only 7 points in the first half. At halftime, the score was 52-38. The crowd in Las Vegas was deafening. In the locker room, Caitlin stood up and spoke. She did not raise her voice. She simply said, "We have been here before. We know what we need to do. Trust each other." Then she looked at Maya and said, "You're ready. Get open and I will find you." In the third quarter, the Fever went on a 17-2 run. Caitlin scored 8 points and dished out 4 assists, 3 of them to Maya for open threes. The Aces called a timeout, but the momentum had shifted. The Fever took the lead in the fourth quarter and never looked back. The final score was 98-94. Caitlin finished with 29 points, 11 assists, and 9 rebounds. Maya added 21 points, a career high. In the post-game interview, Caitlin deflected all praise to her teammates, particularly Maya. "She's special," Caitlin said. "She's going to be the face of this league one day." The season unfolded like a novel with too many plot twists. There was a 3-game losing streak in May, when the Fever's defense collapsed and opposing guards scored at will. Caitlin called a players-only meeting. She did not shy away from accountability. She admitted she had been forcing passes and neglecting her defensive assignments. The next night she recorded 4 steals and a block, and the Fever won by 18. There was a record-setting game in June, when Caitlin scored 53 points against the Chicago Sky, a franchise record, and followed it up with a triple-double in the next game. The headlines shifted from "Was she worth the hype?" to "Is she the greatest shooter of all time?" The debates began to feel tired because the evidence was overwhelming. All the while, Caitlin continued her work off the court. She made a trip to Des Moines, where her basketball academy had expanded to include a second facility, a state-of-the-art training center with 6 courts, a weight room, and classrooms for academic tutoring. She spent a full day there, running drills with girls aged 8 to 18, signing autographs, and listening to their stories. One girl, a 13-year-old point guard named Tanya, told Caitlin that she wanted to play in the WNBA, but her family could not afford travel costs for AAU tournaments. Caitlin stayed late to talk with Tanya's mother, and the next week, a scholarship from Caitlin's foundation covered Tanya's expenses for the entire season. That story, leaked by a local reporter, went viral, but Caitlin never spoke of it publicly. She believed that generosity should be quiet. The All-Star Game that season was held in Indianapolis, and the Fever hosted the event. The weekend was a celebration of the league's growth. The three-point contest featured Caitlin, Sabrina Ionescu, and a newcomer named Jordan Chen, who had become a rising star in her second season. Caitlin won the contest by making 25 of 30 shots in the final round, a performance that drew a standing ovation from the crowd. In the All-Star Game itself, she played only 20 minutes but recorded 17 assists, feeding the league's best players for easy baskets. The game was a showcase of skill and camaraderie, and afterward the players posed for a group photo that the league used as its promotional image for the next season. But the real drama came in the playoffs. The Fever earned the top seed, winning 65 games, a league record. Their path to the finals went through a surprising opponent, the Dallas Wings, who had upset the defending champions in the first round. The Wings were led by a veteran point guard who had been in the league for 12 years, a former Defensive Player of the Year who was determined to shut Caitlin down. The series was a chess match. In Game 1, Caitlin scored 35 points, but the Wings won by 3. In Game 2, she was held to 12 points on 6 of 20 shooting, yet the Fever won by 10, thanks to Maya Tor's 28 points. The series went the distance, a grueling 5 games. In Game 5, with the season on the line, Caitlin played all 40 minutes, her jersey soaked with sweat, her legs heavy. With the score tied at 92 and 20 seconds left, she took the inbound pass, dribbled to the top of the key, and pump-faked her defender into the air. She stepped sideways, launched a 3, and watched it swish. The Fever won by 3. Caitlin collapsed to the floor, exhausted, as her teammates piled on top of her. The finals were a rematch with the New York Liberty, the team that had knocked them out 2 years earlier. The Liberty had a new coach and a revamped roster, but they still had Sabrina Ionescu, who had become Caitlin's greatest rival and closest friend. The two had developed a mutual respect that transcended competition. They texted each other after games, shared workout tips, and even collaborated on a joint charity event during the off-season. But on the court, they were warriors. The series was a masterpiece of basketball, each game decided by single digits. In Game 3, Ionescu hit a game-winning floater with 2 seconds left. In Game 4, Caitlin answered with a 40-point triple-double. The series was tied at 2 games apiece. Game 5 was in Indianapolis, the Fever's home crowd roaring from the opening tip. The game was back and forth, neither team leading by more than 6. With 3 minutes left, the score was tied at 88. Caitlin drove into the lane, drew 2 defenders, and kicked the ball to Maya Torres in the corner. Maya rose up and drained the 3, putting the Fever up by 3. On the next possession, Caitlin stole a pass intended for Ionescu, raced down the court, and found a trailing teammate for a layup. The lead swelled to 5. The Liberty called a timeout. When play resumed, Ionescu hit a tough step-back 3 to cut the lead to 2. The Fever inbounded with 25 seconds left. Caitlin held the ball, letting the clock run down. With 8 seconds left, she rejected a ball screen, went one-on-one against Ionescu, and pulled up for a mid-range jumper. The shot kissed the front rim, bounced high, and fell through. The crowd erupted. The Liberty called their final timeout, but their last-second 3 was off the mark. The Fever had won the championship again. The celebration was wild. Caitlin was mobbed by her teammates, lifted onto their shoulders. She held the trophy, tears streaming down her face. In the post-game press conference, she was asked what this title meant compared to the first one. She paused, then said, "The first one was about proving that we could do it. This one is about proving that we can keep doing it. That's harder. That's the real challenge." She thanked her teammates, her coaches, the city of Indianapolis, and the fans. Then she looked into the camera and said, "To all the girls watching, keep dreaming, keep working. The game is waiting for you." The off-season brought more change. The WNBA announced a new expansion team in Nashville, and the league's salary cap increased dramatically, allowing teams to retain their stars. Caitlin signed a lucrative endorsement extension with a global athletic brand, making her the highest-paid female athlete in the world. She used the money to launch a scholarship program for young women from underrepresented backgrounds who wanted to pursue careers in sports media, coaching, or athletic training. She also started a podcast where she interviewed players, coaches, and executives about the business of basketball. The podcast became a hit, with millions of downloads per episode. The fifth season found Caitlin at 30 years old, a veteran in a league that was now full of young stars who had grown up watching her. The game had evolved. Teams played faster, shot more threes, and emphasized possession-less basketball. Caitlin had adapted, shifting her game to become more of a playmaker and mentor. Her scoring average dropped slightly, but her assists per game rose to 12, a league record. She no longer needed to score 40 points to win. She could control a game with her passing, her defense, her leadership. The Fever remained contenders, but the competition was fiercer. The Aces had rebuilt around a new core, the Liberty were deep, and a new powerhouse had emerged in the Phoenix Mercury, led by a dynamic rookie named Aaliyah James, who had been compared to Caitlin in terms of hype and talent. Aaliyah had grown up in Chicago, watching Caitlin's college games on television. She had modeled her game after Caitlin's, practicing the same step-back threes and no-look passes. In her rookie season, she led the Mercury to the playoffs, averaging 22 points and 7 assists. The media dubbed her the next Caitlin Clark, a label she both embraced and resisted. In a press conference, she said, "There's only one Caitlin Clark. I'm just trying to be Aaliyah James." Caitlin, for her part, reached out to Aaliyah after her first game, sending a text that said, "Welcome to the league. You're going to be great. Let me know if you ever need anything." They met for dinner during the All-Star break, and Caitlin shared advice about navigating the spotlight, handling criticism, and staying grounded. The passing of the torch was not a ceremony. It was a conversation. The playoffs that season featured a classic encounter between the Fever and the Mercury in the semifinals. The series was a showcase of the league's past and future. Caitlin and Aaliyah matched each other shot for shot, assist for assist. In Game 3, Aaliyah scored 41 points, outplaying Caitlin, who had 32. The Mercury won that game, forcing a Game 4. In the decisive Game 4, Caitlin played with a calm that bordered on serene. She did not force anything. She let the game come to her. She finished with 28 points, 16 assists, and only 2 turnovers. The Fever won by 12. After the game, Caitlin walked over to Aaliyah, hugged her, and whispered, "You're the future, but the present still belongs to me." It was not arrogance, it was respect. They met again in the finals, a 5-game series that captivated the basketball world. The Fever won in 5 games, their third championship in 4 years. Caitlin was named Finals MVP for the 3rd time. In the post-game celebration, she lifted the trophy and gave a speech that was both triumphant and reflective. She talked about the journey, the doubters, the sleepless nights, the joy of the game. She thanked her parents, her coaches, her teammates, and the fans. Then she said something that surprised everyone. "This might be my last season." The arena went silent. She continued, "I'm not retiring yet, but I want to spend more time with my family, focus on my foundation, and maybe start a coaching career. I'm not done playing, I just want to do it on my own terms." The next season, her 6th, was billed as the farewell tour. Every arena gave her a standing ovation. The league created a special tribute video that played before each game. Caitlin acknowledged the applause, but she remained focused on the game. She played some of the best basketball of her career, leading the league in assists for the 4th straight year and winning her 3rd MVP award. The Fever made the playoffs again, but they fell in the 2nd round to a younger, faster team. It was not the fairy-tale ending some had hoped for, but Caitlin did not mind. She had never chased perfection. She had chased growth. In the off-season, she announced her retirement. The press conference was emotional. She thanked everyone, from her first coach in Iowa to the last teammate she had in Indiana. She said, "Basketball gave me everything. It gave me a voice, a platform, a family. I hope I gave something back." She wiped away tears and smiled. "The game is in good hands. I can't wait to watch it grow." After retirement, Caitlin became a part owner of the Fever and an analyst for national broadcasts. She coached a youth team that won a national championship. She wrote a memoir that spent 20 weeks on the bestseller list. She married her college sweetheart and had 2 children, a boy and a girl. She taught them to play basketball in the driveway, but she never pushed them. She let them find their own love for the game. And the game continued to evolve. The WNBA expanded to 16 teams, then 20. The salaries became comparable to those in the men's league. The television ratings grew every year. The little girls who had watched Caitlin Clark became players, coaches, executives. They took the baton and ran with it. And every time a young star hits a step-back three or throws a no-look pass, the announcers say, "That's a Caitlin Clark move." The name lives on, not just as a legend, but as a verb, a standard, a way of playing that changed everything. And she still watches. She sits in the stands, her children beside her, and she cheers. Sometimes a fan will approach her and say thank you. She always smiles and says, "The game did more for me than I ever did for it." But she knows the truth. The game gave her a stage. She gave the game a new audience. And in that exchange, something beautiful happened. Basketball became bigger. It became a conversation about what is possible. And it all started with a girl from Iowa who could shoot from the logo and a world that was ready to believe. Years later, Caitlin found herself in a gymnasium in rural Iowa, not far from where she had grown up. She had been invited to speak at a youth basketball clinic. The room was filled with girls of all ages, many of them wearing jerseys with her number 22 on the back. She stood at center court, microphone in hand, and looked out at them. She saw herself in their eyes, the same hunger, the same wonder, the same belief that the game could take them anywhere she had been and beyond. She told them stories from her childhood, the driveway battles with her brothers, the summer leagues where she learned to shoot from deep, the high school games where she first felt the roar of a crowd. She talked about the failures, too, the losses that stung, the criticism that cut deep, the moments when she doubted whether she was good enough. And she told them that the secret was not talent alone. It was persistence. It was showing up every day, even when no one was watching. It was loving the game more than the applause. A young girl in the front row raised her hand. She could not have been more than 10 years old, with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile. She asked, "What was your favorite moment in your whole career?" Caitlin paused. She thought about the championships, the records, the standing ovations. But she smiled and said, "It was a rainy Tuesday night in November when I was a senior in college. We had a game against a tough team and I scored 30 points, but we lost. After the game, a little girl came up to me and gave me a bracelet she had made. It said, 'Believe.' I still have it. That's my favorite moment." The gym fell silent. Then the girl said, "I made you one too." She held up a bracelet with the same word. Caitlin walked over, knelt down, and let the girl put it on her wrist. She hugged her and whispered, "Thank you." The room erupted in clapping. It was a small moment, but it captured everything Caitlin had ever wanted from basketball: connection. Back home that evening, Caitlin sat on the porch of the house she had built on the outskirts of Indianapolis. The property included a full-sized basketball court, but she rarely used it for herself anymore. She used it for the kids from her foundation. She watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, and she thought about the journey. The game had given her a platform, but it had also given her a purpose beyond winning. Every scholarship she funded, every clinic she hosted, every podcast episode where she championed the next generation, that was the real legacy. The records would be broken. LeBron James had once said that records are made to be broken, but legacies are built to last. Caitlin believed that. She knew that someday a young player would eclipse her assist record or her scoring total. That was fine. What mattered was that the game kept growing, kept reaching new audiences, kept inspiring little girls in gyms across the country. The WNBA continued to expand. The league announced 2 more teams, one in Portland and one in Toronto. The television ratings soared to new heights. The All-Star Game became a global event, broadcast in over 100 countries. The players' salaries rose again, and the league secured a historic collective bargaining agreement that guaranteed revenue sharing and health benefits for life. The conversation about women's sports had shifted. It was no longer about asking for permission to be taken seriously. It was about demanding respect and getting it. Caitlin watched from the sidelines, sometimes from the broadcast booth, sometimes from the owner's suite. She felt a swell of pride. She had been part of the movement, but she was not the movement itself. The movement was thousands of players, coaches, executives, fans, and advocates who had fought for decades. She was just one of many who had carried the torch. A decade after her retirement, the league celebrated its 35th anniversary. The Fever honored Caitlin by retiring her number 22 in a ceremony that drew a sold-out crowd at Cambridge Fieldhouse. She walked onto the court with her husband and two children, now teenagers. Her son, a point guard in high school, had inherited her court vision. Her daughter, a shooter with a quick release, had her step-back three. They stood beside her as the banner rose to the rafters. The crowd chanted her name. She waved, and tears streamed down her face. In her speech, she thanked the fans, the city, and the game. She said, "I hope that whenever you see this number, you remember that it's not about me. It's about what we can do together. It's about every girl who ever picked up a basketball and dreamed of something bigger. This banner belongs to all of you." That night, after the ceremony, Caitlin sat in the empty arena, alone on the court. She looked up at the banner, and she thought about the first time she had stepped onto a court as a kid. She thought about the cold mornings in Iowa, the long bus rides, the hotel rooms that felt like home. She thought about the teammates who had become family, the coaches who had believed in her, the rivals who had pushed her to be better. And she thought about the fans, the ones who had traveled hours to watch her play, the ones who had sent letters and homemade signs, the ones who had told her that she had changed their lives. She whispered into the silence, "Thank you." The lights dimmed and she walked off the court for the last time as a player, but she would never leave it entirely. The game was in her blood. The next morning, she received a call from Aaliyah James. Aaliyah was now a veteran, nearing the end of her own storied career. She had won 2 championships with the Mercury and had become the league's all-time leading scorer. She told Caitlin that she was retiring at the end of the season. "I want to do it like you did," she said, "on my own terms, with grace." Caitlin smiled and said, "You've already done it with grace. You've been the face of this league for a decade. I'm so proud of you." They talked for an hour, reminiscing about their battles on the court and their friendship off it. Aaliyah asked Caitlin for advice on life after basketball. Caitlin said, "It's not an ending, it's a beginning. You get to rediscover who you are without the game, but the game will always be part of you. Use it to help others, that's the secret." The season ended and Aaliyah retired. The league held a joint ceremony at the All-Star Game, honoring both Caitlin and Aaliyah as icons of an era. They stood side by side at center court, and the crowd gave them a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. Caitlin leaned over and whispered to Aaliyah, "The torch is passed." Aaliyah nodded, tears in her eyes. "The torch is passed," she repeated. They hugged, and the moment became one of the most iconic images in sports history. In the years that followed, Caitlin became a grandmother. Her daughter gave birth to a baby girl, and Caitlin held her in her arms, whispering stories about basketball into her tiny ear. She knew that this new generation would have opportunities she could only have dreamed of. The game was bigger than ever. The barriers were crumbling. The conversation had changed. And it all started with a girl from Iowa who could shoot from the logo and a world that was ready to believe. But the story did not end there. It continued in every dribble, every pass, every shot taken by a young player who had seen Caitlin play and thought, "I can do that too." The game was alive, and Caitlin Clark was no longer just a player. She was a spark that had lit a fire, and the fire was still burning.